Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the role of open disclosure in aged care. My name is Janet Anderson. I am the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commissioner and I'll be chairing today's webinar. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting wherever you are in Australia, and paying my respects to elders past and present, and extending those respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are part of today's conversation. Now, today, as I said, we're going to be talking about open disclosure, and our ambition is to increase general understanding of the role of open disclosure as an essential element in a provider's response when something goes wrong in the course of providing care. And I'm delighted to be joined by a first-rate panel, including Louise McLeod, the Aged Care Complaints Commissioner within the Commission, and also Bill Lyon, Chief Executive of Churches of Christ in Queensland, and Donna Hart, Executive General Manager Operations in the same organisation, Churches of Christ in Queensland. Now, we're going to be discussing the value of open disclosure, how it supports providers to have a genuine partnership with each aged care recipient, and also to respect and animate their rights. And as you know, that will take on a heightened importance under the new Aged Care Act. Now, the bill, which has been introduced to Parliament already, is quite different from our current Aged Care Act in a number of important ways, including that it contains a statement of rights, as well as strengthened aged care quality standards and a brand new regulatory framework. So in today's webinar, we're going to touch on how open disclosure is important today, right now, but also aligns with specific actions in the strengthened quality standards, as well as in the Code of Conduct. We'll also be mentioning a regulatory campaign that the Commission is pursuing to promote consistent understanding and use of open disclosure in the sector. And our guests, Bill and Donna, will share real-life examples of what open disclosure looks like at their services, the challenges they've encountered, and how their experiences shape their practice. And at the end of all of that, we will have time for a question and answer session. So let me use that to go into some housekeeping messages. Please send your questions in using the question box via the live Q&A tab, which should be visible on your screen, and do that at any time. I will see them come in and we will get to as many of them as possible in the time we have at the end of the panel discussion. There is already also a short survey for you to complete at the end of this session. Please do so, stay online to complete it, because we do value your feedback and use it both to assess our own performance, but also to decide where to next. We are recording today's webinar and the recorded version will be published on our website, and we will also be sending a link to everyone who's registered for today's session so that you'll get it in your feed. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Louise to come forward and participate in a short conversation with me about the fundamentals of open disclosure. So welcome, Louise. My question to you is a request. Can you please tell us about open disclosure, what it is, and why it's important, not just to us in the Commission, but to providers and particularly to aged care recipients?
Thanks, Janet. So open disclosure is the open discussion that an aged care provider has with an older person when something goes wrong that is harmed or has the potential to harm or cause harm to that older person. And looking at decades of anecdotal evidence and research, we know that open disclosure plays a critical role to remedy the problem, restore older people's trust and confidence, and prevent that problem from recurring. And for the Commission, it's important that when things go wrong, providers practice open disclosure to redress the harm and repair those relationships, and ultimately improve the experience of those in their care.
Okay, let's get to some of the practical issues then. How is it practiced by aged care providers, and what do we know about the way it's practiced or how often it's practiced?
So using the data that the Commission holds, we can see how open disclosure is being understood and practiced by providers and workers at the three levels, so service level, provider level and sector level. And the news isn't great. Our complaints and serious incident response scheme notifications data is telling us that open disclosure is not offered consistently across the sector. And when we look at complaint cases finalised by the Commission, and if we focus on August 2024, for example, 49%, so less than half, are finalised with an outcome that involves the provider giving a better explanation, practising open disclosure, or making an apology. And when we look at the SIRS notifications in the 6-month period at the beginning of the year, so from January through to June, open disclosure is estimated to have occurred for almost 1 in 4 serious incidents in residential care and home services. So that means around 3/4 of all serious incidents in that period did not involve open disclosure. So, too few providers are taking that opportunity to use open disclosure as a way of addressing concerns raised by an older person receiving care or by someone who has been impacted by a serious incident. It's not happening enough and it needs to change.
All right. Well, them's fighting words. Let's get into some of that detail. What's your vision for open disclosure? How do you want to see providers and workers using it in their practice?
So this is something that I've been thinking about quite deeply in my role as Complaints Commissioner ever since I joined the Commission. The evidence is crystal clear. Open disclosure is a practice that can have a profound impact on the quality of care experienced by older people. And I want to see open disclosure routinely practiced by service providers and workers when something goes wrong that has harmed or has the potential to cause harm to an older person. Open disclosure should occur as a natural part of every conversation that an aged care worker has with an older person or with a family member or a supporter who raises a concern about care. And this means that providers and workers need to have the knowledge and capability to practice open disclosure. And the Commission staff also need to have this knowledge and capability too, to be able to guide and support providers and workers to use open disclosure. So there's some work for us to do here too. And I'm convinced that we can do this. As the regulator, we want everybody's aged care experience to benefit from that close partnership with their provider, a partnership that under the new Aged Care Act, as you mentioned, will respect and reflect the rights of older people to that safe quality care that meets their needs. But to achieve it now, we have to start practicing open disclosure, and it must be an integral part of that care. It's not optional, it's a must-have. It doesn't need to be fancy or complicated, but it does need to be happening now. And I'm committed to working with older people, providers, workers, Commission staff to make this happen. And where we're starting is going forward, providers can expect that the Commission's complaints officers are going to raise open disclosure with you when you make when a complaint is made to the Commission about their service. And we'll be checking in with providers, encouraging them and supporting them to use open disclosure so it becomes part of every complaint resolution process.
So it's important now, and it will continue to be and probably take on heightened importance under the Act when the bill is passed. So let's assume that the Act goes live on the 1st of July. What will that mean for open disclosure? How is it going to become more important? If you could just elaborate on that for us a bit.
For sure. Look, under the new Act, there is a statement of rights, and it describes what older people can expect when seeking or accessing government-funded aged care services. And for service providers and workers delivering care, this means that they must ensure that older people who are using their aged care services have their fundamental rights respected and upheld. And this is where open disclosure comes in. So when something goes wrong that impacts an aged care recipient, open disclosure provides that opportunity for providers and workers to support that person's rights by finding out firsthand from them what the older person wants to happen to put things right. And it enables providers and workers to work with the older person to understand the issues, identify the most appropriate response. And that response needs to be practical and proportionate to the seriousness of the harm and meet the needs and expectations of the older person. And providers are expected to always seek to practice open disclosure as that first point of call when something goes wrong. Open disclosure is explicitly referred to in the current aged care quality standards. So in Standard 6C, providers must demonstrate that appropriate action has been taken in response to complaints and an open disclosure process has been used when things go wrong. And in Standard 8E3, where clinical care is provided, a provider must demonstrate that their clinical governance framework includes open disclosure. And in the strengthened aged care standards to be introduced under the new Act, that emphasis is retained. So there are two open disclosure specific actions under Standard 2. And these are that the provider practices open disclosure and communicates with older people, family carers and workers when things go wrong, and that the provider takes timely action to resolve complaints and uses an open disclosure process when things go wrong. And then you've also got the Code of Conduct for Aged Care, which states that providers and workers are expected to understand and use open disclosure when things go wrong to prevent the problem from happening again. So what you can see here is that we've got the current law, the proposed law, the standards, and the code. They're all saying the same thing. That is, service providers must practice open disclosure when things go wrong. So there are really no if, buts, or maybes about it. And at the same time, it's important to understand that open disclosure is much more than a legal obligation. International and Australian studies show that open disclosure, when delivered well, can repair and rebuild trust. There is research that demonstrates that when incidents have been handled openly and honestly, and care recipients then get more trust in the provider and are more likely to return to their same provider after an incident. So you can see now why we're focusing on open disclosure more in the complaints management processes, and that providers can expect us to be talking with them about open disclosure when there are complaints raised with us. It's a provider responsibility at the moment and under the new Act. And it's going to help promote the aims of the new Act because it's going to support better outcomes for older people receiving care. And I should add that we're also going to be looking at whether a provider has used open disclosure more broadly across the Commission. So, for example, has it been used in response to a serious incident? And if not, why not?
Okay. I'm going to quote back to you a sentence you used in that discussion. You said that research shows that open disclosure, when delivered well, can repair and rebuild trust. Can you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Thanks, Janet. Look, trust is so important in the delivery of care, and I want to sort of break it down into the two parts. So the impact of open disclosure on older Australians and its value for providers and workers. So for older people, an open and honest conversation helps them to understand what went wrong and be reassured that providers and workers also understand what went wrong. Apologies, an expression of regret, an acknowledgement of what went wrong can bring comfort, and it can help to lift those feelings of anger, grief, helplessness, or a loss of control. And for some people, it's even important, or more important than when an explanation of what went wrong. And knowing that their provider is going to be taking action to address any harm experienced and to prevent recurrences can help restore their trust and confidence. And being able to share their experience, give feedback and participate in a continuous improvement process puts older people in control of their care, and it places them at the centre of what happens. So older people receiving care benefit from open disclosure, but also so do providers and workers, because for them it demonstrates a commitment to act with integrity, honesty and transparency. Their clients' and families' involvement improves incident investigation quality. It can promote an open workplace culture, and it enhances care quality and safety. An apology, when followed with forgiveness from the client, can also provide closure and alleviate any feelings of guilt and shame for workers. And open disclosure can also reduce the risk of subsequent complaints and litigation. So at the end of the day, providers should be practising open disclosure because it's the right thing to do. It's in the aged care law, the standards, the code, because it's part of best practice care, and it benefits everybody, older people, providers and workers. And having said that, we also need to understand that practising open disclosure does require certain skills and capabilities that we can't take for granted. Providers must ensure they have the right policies and procedures in place, and that their staff receive the necessary training and support to do it well. And all of this is doable, and the benefits far outweigh the effort required to put this operating framework in place. So here at the Commission, we're committed to working with providers to support you on your journey towards best practice open disclosure. Thanks, Janet.
Just reading the questions coming in, and keep them coming because there are a good number, and they're really framing up the conversation very well. Now we move to the panel discussion, and I'm very pleased that Bill Lyon and Donna Hart are joining me for this session. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for agreeing to be part of today's webinar. Bill, I'm going to start with you. Can you just tell us a bit more about Churches of Christ? How long has it been operating? How big is it? What services do you provide?
Thank you, Janet. Look, Churches of Christ in Queensland, we opened our first aged care home way back in 1950, and we had a retirement village, home care services starting in 1966. We operate 24 residential aged care facilities, predominantly in Queensland, and a few in Victoria. 22 of our retirement living villages, and we service over 8,500 home care clients across a range of programs. Our portfolio encompasses both metro, regional and remote locations, and we have well over 2,500 dedicated staff who help us deliver that. Churches of Christ also supports our residents and clients through aged care in the care continuum, and we provide a high level of spiritual and emotional support through the linkages with our church communities as well. Church of Christ is governed by a board. We're a little bit different also. We have a council that sits over the top of that, and we aim to reflect both the commercial and the missional aspects of our service. We aim to provide a care that reflects both the love of Christ through our actions, but also our values that allows all of our staff to support open disclosure and continuous improvement.
That's really interesting. You've provided a very nice word picture of your organisation and also your mission. Donna, coming to you as Executive Director Seniors Living, what I want to hear from you about is what open disclosure looks like in your service. Give us the practical perspective on this, please.
Thanks, Janet. So at Churches of Christ, we believe that open disclosure is a process of communicating promptly, truthfully and factually with our residents and clients and their families when things don't go to plan or we haven't met their expectations. This is certainly consistent with our organisational value of mutual trust, and we are committed as an organisation to openness and transparency in all communications. We have a well-developed framework within our organisation for our people to follow, and we provide training for our leaders at a service level so that they can feel confident to undertake that process when and if it's required. Whilst the framework can be quite formal in its makeup, the conversation will always have an individual flavour based on the relationships that people have at a service level, and their knowledge of that resident, that client family, or the family members that they're speaking with. So to guide us, Churches of Christ has adopted a team mnemonic to guide our staff when undertaking open disclosure. So TEAM stands for tell, explain, ask and make. So just talking to the tell piece, we ensure firstly that the resident is in a comfortable space or that their family member is available to have that conversation. The last thing we want is to have these conversations in a passing sense along the corridor. So ensure that there's a level of comfort and people are ready to accept that information. I think it's important that people speak in a language and a terminology that they will understand. We don't want to be coming into that situation and be speaking in a clinical way. We want it to be well understood. This allows for the client, the resident and the family to exercise control, make informed choices and be involved in the solution or the plan of attack that's going to go forward. We think that's a really important part of this process, that we include the resident, the client or the family in the process to reach resolution. We also give them at that time the opportunity to ask questions should they need to, seek clarification and have a deep understanding of what we know right then and there when we're making that open disclosure. Of course, if there are cultural considerations, they need to be taken into consideration, language barriers, diversity constraints, etc. And that needs to be considered and well planned for in advance prior to any conversations happening, so that we can build trust, increase confidence, but also reduce any anxiety that might be coming with that conversation. And of course, we need to be mindful of privacy and comply with resident wishes. They may wish to have 8 members of their family present or no one. So ensuring that we actually ask how it's going to be most well received by that consumer. So the explain piece is talking to what is known at that point in time. And sometimes not all the information is known right at the point in time we're making the open disclosure. And that's okay. And that's when we make the invitation to say, this is a journey that we want you to walk with us to ensure that whatever actions are planned, whatever resolution is put in place, you're comfortable with and you really understand and can make informed choices in that space. We then, in the explain part, we say what has happened, what is known as to why it has happened, and as I mentioned, that may not be well known at that point. What are the immediate actions required to ensure safety or to ensure that we can mitigate as much as possible right at that moment? What additional investigations will occur? So it's bringing the resident, client and family member along on the journey to say that the open disclosure is where we open the door, and then there would be further additional actions that will take place. You'll be kept informed along the way. I think it's important to understand if a mitigation strategy has been implemented immediately, that they're made very well aware of that and they're comfortable with that as a resolution strategy, and they get an opportunity to add any input into that so that they feel valued. I think it's important then to provide a timeline and what they can expect from here. And it may be there may be a variety of actions that might be taking place depending on the nature of the incident that's occurred or the level of complaint that we've received. So at this point, we believe it's very important to ask the resident, client or family member, whomever you're having that discussion with, is how is this impacting on them and how are they feeling right now emotionally? Acknowledging that there might be a myriad of emotions that they're feeling right now, from confusion to anger to sadness, whatever it might be. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that that's okay, and we'll work with them so that they have a deeper level of understanding to possibly reduce anxiety, or increased understanding might lessen anger at that point in time. I think it's very important to ensure that we're listening carefully and we are not just delivering a message, we're actually looking to see how the message is received and acting accordingly in that space. And then finally, the make part of the mnemonic is provide us a sincere apology, express regret that expectations have not been met or an unexpected outcome has occurred. And this is not about apportioning blame or seeking to say Molly did the wrong thing. It's just about saying we are sorry that we didn't meet your expectations. We want to work with you sincerely to seek resolution and to understand how this has happened and what we can do so to prevent it occurring again. I think the final part of that is then to set the expectation for the recipient to understand that there will be a feedback loop. We are going to come back to them and say, whilst we may reach a resolution today, that doesn't mean that resolution will be meeting your needs in 2 weeks' time. So we're going to come and ask you and say, the resolutions that we sought to put into place, has that worked for you? Is there something else that we need to do in that space? So I think that having that feedback loop is really important, because over time, people have time to think about what may work better, and it's just opening up that partnership to ensure that we're working together.
Oh, wonderful. That's a very comprehensive account. Thank you so much. And it's generated a few questions. I'm just going to insert one right now. Annette wants to know whether you have specific timeframes for the initial conversation with the client or resident, and then for resolution. Do you try to get it underway fairly smartly? Yeah.
We do. So it can be a very fine balance between first things first is we ensure that the resident client is safe, that any immediate actions have been undertaken and they're in a position to receive that information without any other noise happening in that space. So of course that's our first thing, but we like to have the initial open disclosure conversation as soon as we can in relation to the incident or complaint, so that people understand that we are taking it seriously. There are actions in place. We may not have all the information right then and there. We may not understand the why, but we can set the expectation around what we're going to do and how they're going to be involved in that. So I think doing it as close as you can to the incident or complaint is really important.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Bill, I'm going to bring you back in here. As Chief Executive, you're obviously holding the organisation to account, I suppose, for this practice and working closely with Donna to ensure that it's done. Do you have any particular framing on ensuring consistency? Because if you expect it to be done, you expect it to be done consistently well. And I wonder whether you have any comments to make on that.
Yeah, look, I think it, as the leader, it comes back to making sure that we've got the right training in place. Our staff feel supported as well as the residents. There's respect there. So it's an integral part, I suppose, in ensuring that we have a consistent approach to open disclosure. And I think, one of the most important people in this whole process is our position of a registered nurse is on the floor. So they're the ones in charge of that shift. And as an organisation, we make sure we provide them a clear set of processes and what the expected behaviour is and what action they should do. And Donna's outlined that action as we've gone through. I think it's important that we also provide that training. So as a leader, it's really important to set that expectation. So both in our open disclosure, what our incident investigation involves, and how we handle our complaints. And again, we want our staff to be well informed, because again, being well informed, well trained about the processes and the support they have means that they can confidently engage with our residents, clients, and also the families. And knowing that that is at times a challenging process. So again, for most of those that have got nursing training and stuff, it's that practice and training, and you know what to do. And so again, we have processes and document guides as so to raise that awareness, etc. But again, I think, it's really that culture that we promote, is that it's about receiving feedback is really important, and we hope to get people to treat it as a gift, and so that people would rather come to us and tell us than hear about it later when it's escalated.
All right. I want to move the conversation on to the various challenges you encountered in engendering this new approach, which presumably you had to commence at some point. You haven't always done this. You've decided this is important, and then you've taken the trouble gone to the effort of ensuring that it's introduced and then done consistently well. We'll come to some of those challenges in a minute, but just to close out this particular session, I want to ask each of you what you see as being the tangible benefits. Have you seen improvements in people's experience of care? Do they give you feedback, a resident or a client, that they appreciated the opportunity for participating in this sort of process? And do you think it's made a material difference? And Bill, I'll start with you and then go to Donna.
Yeah, look, Janet, thank you for that. I've only been in the aged care sector for 6 months, so it's a very limited one in that sense. But during that time as well, I've had the pleasure of having my mother, who is 93, first under respite in one of our centres and then moved to another one. So again, that means I get into our centres quite regularly. And look, I think what I've seen in all of our staff, and experiencing firsthand, but it's always a bit hard when you're the CEO and some of the staff know that it's your mother. But again, even if it was 80% of that, I see them treated with respect. For my mother moving in after 93 years of living at home and being in there, obviously she had some adjustments to do. Differences in it, and I saw our staff really treat them with care and compassion. A couple of times I had to explain to my mother as well what that what she's saying will be treated very seriously, and she made a complaint about one of our staff and had to treat that independently. But again, I've been super impressed with our staff as to how they do that, and it's about that environment that Donna and the team prior to my arrival have really set up. And so I'm really confident that as I visit the centres as well, and I do that regularly right across the board, and our board does, we're often seeing family members who feel free and comfortable to come up to us and not make a complaint, if you like, but just seek to explain, something that was happening with their mother. We had one gentleman from a culturally different background that his mother was in a memory support unit, and she was getting some adverse sort of comments from another resident. So we were able to deal with that and find a solution. So,
thank you. Donna, you're the one on the ground making the whole show sing. Have you seen examples where an open disclosure process has made a difference to the individual receiving care and also the staff who've participated in it?
Yeah, I think so. There have been many occasions where it can go very well, and other occasions where it doesn't have such a great outcome for our staff and residents. But I guess building on the culture of continuous improvement, it's approaching the incident or the complaint with a continuous quality improvement mindset, and understanding that it doesn't matter what service provision you are providing, you can always be better, you can always improve, there's always ways in which that can be better. And I suppose particularly in the clinical sense, where there have been errors of omission, or wound care hasn't gone as well as it could have gone, including the resident and their family in the plan of action has significantly improved the outcomes based on the fact that they're invested in that, as it's just not something that's being done to them. They feel part of it. There's nothing about them without them, that sort of mentality, and they can feel safe to provide feedback in as far as to say, have you tried this that's worked previously for us? And it may well be, not best practice at this point in time, but at least that can open up a conversation to say, we really appreciate the fact that you want to collaborate with us. And then having that case conferencing type of approach where we ensure that there are doctors and allied health professionals involved, so that there is a really comprehensive review and understanding of the incident or the complaint, so that a sensible and really a resolution that's going to stick can be put into place.
Yeah, which is so vital. Okay. All right. That's actually a really nice segue to the next part of the conversation, which is where there might be challenges or differences of opinion and how your service has navigated those. And so, Bill, back to you just briefly. There is something which is raised with us from time to time, and that is a concern about the risks of legal liability if you embark on an open disclosure process. And I'm assuming you've given some thought to this, and I just wonder if you could share your views with us on that.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. Look, I'm not going to get into a very legal discussion, because if you ask your lawyers, they give you 4 pages of discussion. So, I've been across many sectors, and, it's probably heightened the importance here. Look, and I think legal liability, to me, or risk, should never drive our behaviours or actions or our measures. Compliance with our laws and our standards, and again, the values that we have here at Church of Christ, are that we relentlessly pursue that compliance. So in my mind, open disclosure and legal liability do not have a connection, and they should not. And I know that's probably contrary to a lot of people's thoughts and questions, because again, you don't know the true depths of what's really has actually happened. It shouldn't be a blame game right at the beginning. And, if you introduce that legal liability, I think people don't actually go and try and find what has actually contributed to the issue. And so again, it doesn't actually mean that anyone is to blame, but what we've got to do is try and seek what actually happened. So again, that's where open disclosure comes into it from my mind. And again, we're also looking to find out things that to seek to understand what actually happened so we can prevent it from happening again. And so again, it's that broader piece of understanding about the situation in its entirety. And so again, from my perspective, and I know that legal people will say the same, apology doesn't equal liability. So inviting the family, to walk on that journey with you, or the resident, and to seek to understand why, I think that's when we understand a lot of the complexities. And again, I sort of say from my own individuals and from a defence point of view, our people don't come to work to do something wrong. And so, we really just need to do that. So I suppose, in essence, I keep saying that legal liability shouldn't drive our behaviours or our actions. But again, we need to make sure that we do comply with the laws and the standards.
Absolutely. Louise, I would like to bring you in here, if I can, slightly out of timetable order, but to offer your formal commentary on this key issue, because I know people summon this as a bit of a block, but it should not be, and it must not be. Do you want to offer a few more words to back in what Bill's just said?
Yeah, thanks, Janet. Look, as Bill touched on, an apology or an expression of regret are key components of open disclosure. And in fact, all Australian jurisdictions have laws that are designed to protect statements of apology or regret. So an apology or expression of regret to consumers is not considered to be an admission of fault or liability, and it is not considered in determining fault or liability. So it's really important to note that an apology, it should include the words of "I am sorry" or "we are sorry," and apologise for what has happened. It shouldn't contain speculative statements or an admission of liability or apportioning blame, like what Bill has described. So, I think it's really important to understand that all jurisdictions have laws that are designed to protect statements of apology or regret. So there is no barrier.
Yeah, and that's a really important myth to bust, as you have just done. Thank you. Donna, next question's for you. I want to explore just briefly this notion of log jams. It can't all have been smooth sailing. And what I'm asking you now to do is disclose, using the word of the week, what you might have encountered that you had to overcome in order to put this in place, or where there has been a misstep from which you have learned. If you could just give us maybe one example.
Yeah, sure. Look, the concept of open disclosure in the aged care sector can be anxiety producing for the staff members. They don't particularly want to ever have to speak to someone and say something's not met your expectations or gone wrong, because we're there to care for people. So I guess it's about the training and the building of confidence for our staff has been the number one key issue to introducing open disclosure as just part of the normal process. And the more people can become familiar with how they're going to do it, and that framework really provides them with a step-by-step way to do that, and it enables them.
Remind us again, what does TEAM stand?
Tell, explain, ask, and make.
Right.
And because we're in the care industry, it gives you a really great opportunity, particularly that ask space, to speak in with compassion and to lean into the anxiety or the anger or the sadness that person may be feeling. So I think it's all about the training, the support, and the culture in which we build that support mechanism in for our staff that are out there on the ground. And it might be 9 o'clock at night and they feel all alone and they're the only RN on the floor. But ensuring that they know who they could call if they needed to, or what piece of document will support them at this time, and that they have had consistent and clear training over time to build confidence and just feel comfortable that process can be undertaken without producing anxiety.
Yeah, and also to lean heavily on what you were saying earlier, the continuous improvement cycle.
Yes, yeah.
So that you're constantly learning and improving and supporting staff to go through that process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to shout out to you, Eric says, "This is good stuff. I'm a resident and this strikes a chord big time." So there you go.
Thanks, Eric.
Very positive, strong note of endorsement from one someone who's watching. Bill, I'm going to round out this section. I will close with a question to Louise about the work that the Commission is doing to support the sector. But Bill, last question to you before we go to Q&A. At the chief executive level and in your relationships with the board, how do you set the tone? How do you enable staff to lean into this level of ongoing engagement with the people to whom they're providing care, and to have the confidence that Donna's clearly trying to cultivate in that workforce, and to clear away the log jams? What do you see as your role and the role of your board in setting that tone?
Yeah, look, Janet, it's a very good question, and one that in the 6 months I've been working with our chair and our board very hard on. And again, some of the keys that I've found and working with them is having a supportive board and subcommittee. So we have a governance and risk one. And again, it's getting those meetings to focus on what's understanding of the root causes through the open disclosure and the measures, etc., and help us identify trends. And again, providing some experience guidance to ensure that we're truly understanding what's happening and what actions we need to take. At Churches of Christ, we're very lucky. We've got an ex-aged care auditor that is on our board. I sometimes wonder that that's not a good thing, because I get show cause notices as a CEO, first time ever in my life. But again, they're very passionate about it. And I think, as Donna's been saying, the board and, as the CEO, I'm very mindful that setting that culture of continuous improvement is very important. And again, rather than seeking the finger of blame and to apportion that blame. So again, having an experienced and balanced board is something that needs to do that, so that you get that right balance, so they're not all focused on one area. And again, ensuring that we have the right operational people at the meetings as well, so that the board can help with that. So Donna and our clinical governance manager, and from time to time, other people come along. And I think that's really important. And to take that open disclosure in with the board as well, is that, I need to work with the board and the board to set that tone that they feel comfortable to disclose the information, so that we're acting on the full picture.
Right, okay. Very useful insights there. Thank you. Louise, to round out proceedings before we go to the question and answer section, could you just share with us what the Commission is doing in our regulatory campaign, so-called, and what it might mean for the sector? Thank you.
Yeah, sure, Janet. So the Commission uses regulatory campaigns to target specific sector-wide issues and risks, and that's a way of prompting providers to improve care and services for older people. And we've identified open disclosure as one of the priority sector-wide risks, and we mentioned that in our recently published regulatory strategy for 24-25. And so what we've done is to launch a regulatory campaign on open disclosure, and we're coordinating efforts across the Commission to promote consistent understanding and use of open disclosure across the sector. And this webinar marks the beginning of that campaign. And there's going to be a survey after the webinar, and we want everyone watching to fill out the survey and let us know what help you think providers need to get on board with adopting open disclosure as part of a routine delivery of care.
Nice way of rounding out the discussions. Let's go to Q&A. We have a number of questions which have come in and a bit of time to deal with them, so that's great. Louise, staying with you in the first instance, Arthur's asked, my understanding is that open disclosure is used for all incidents and not just complaints. Is that the case?
That's right, Arthur. There's no reason. I think you've heard both Donna and Bill sort of describe it quite eloquently, that there's actually no type of complaint or no type of incident where you couldn't use open disclosure. Yeah, I think it can be used in all instances.
Yeah. Rosemary's asked when the new Statement of Rights will be released, and I might take that one. Rosemary, the Statement of Rights is an inherent part of the Aged Care Bill, which has now been introduced to Parliament. It is the subject of a Senate inquiry, even as we speak, which is due to report at the end of this month. And then the Senate and subsequently the House of Representatives will sit to determine whether they're going to vote in favour of the bill, which, if they do, means it will become the Act, the new Aged Care Act. And all of that is up to Parliament to navigate. If that all happens in good time, then the government has indicated that it is hoping and expecting that the new Aged Care Act, including the Statement of Rights, will come into place from 1 July next year. But you can actually read that Statement of Rights in advanced draft form in the Aged Care Bill. If you want to Google that, I expect you'll be able to find it. And there's also a very detailed, what they call explanatory memorandum, which accompanies the bill, which is the plain English version of the legislation, if that helps you to get to grips with what's being proposed in the new Act. Thank you for that question. All right, I've got some other ones which go to practical details, and I think, Donna, I'll be putting these to you. Questions come in. How do you conduct open disclosure with older people who have cognitive impairment or who may have been prescribed psychotropic medication and therefore have some effect on their cognitive abilities?
Sure. Thanks, Janet. I think it's important to just acknowledge the fact that people living with cognitive issues may well have a fluctuating level of ability to understand at any point in time. So I think it's important to, regardless of the position they're in at any point in time, if it's close enough to the incident for you to speak with them in a calm way, it's important that you do. And if they have a nominated representative, ensuring that that person is available and in attendance. But it's certainly something that we do and should do, is to continue to explain to that person, even if they are living with dementia or some other cognitive, or under the within the use of antipsychotic drugs, etc. They deserve that open disclosure just as much as anyone else, and I think it's important that we do that.
Oh, I'm really liking that sort of framing of the opportunity presented through open disclosure. So, one, in relation to your staffing, how do you support staff who may be wary or lacking in confidence in participating in open disclosure? Now, Bill has talked briefly about the training and support, but if, for example, somebody has had a poor prior experience of open disclosure where it hasn't gone entirely to plan, how do you encourage them to get back on the horse? No, this is important. We can do this. We should do this.
I would say nothing beats scenario-based training for people to have an opportunity to replay how it went for you and what do you think went wrong or didn't go so well, so that they then have an arsenal of script or some sort of understanding of what they'd say next time. And you can't always be prepared for every reaction, but I think if you're well trained and you're repetitively trained, it builds confidence that you can deal with those situations. And we can't exclude the fact that it would be anxiety producing for people, even no matter how well prepared they are. And I think it's also about, before any incidents occur, that they're working really hard to develop relationships with their residents and their clients and their families.
Can I come in there? I know I'm interrupting you, but somebody, I won't be able to find their name quickly enough, but they've asked, how do you embark on open disclosure if the residents are concerned that to raise an issue might go badly for them, that workers might be discouraged or even a bit cranky, that somebody receiving care has raised an issue? How do you overcome that reluctance to rock the boat?
Yeah, I guess it speaks totally to the relationships that we build and the way we communicate routinely with people. So if they feel part of their care journey and they're collaborated with often and communicated with often, then they will always feel very comfortable and safe to say, hey, that cup of tea is just stone cold every time I get it. Or, I mean, I'm not trying to trivialize the feedback, but it should be a natural part of the relationship that we have with the people that call our facilities home, or the clients that we visit in their own homes. So they have absolutely every right, and we should, from a continuous quality improvement mindset, encourage that all the time, and even ask, was the shower that you just had, was it okay? Did it meet your expectations? I'm sorry, I didn't ask whether the temperature of the water was warm enough, etc. So it's just about being curious and wanting to understand what their experience is like.
This is an interesting question. I'll paraphrase it. Somebody's asked whether open disclosure should be used where there is an unwitnessed fall. And I think their line of thinking is, if staff weren't directly involved, then is this still a useful approach? And I'm thinking you'd say, well, yes, why wouldn't you? But I'll leave you to answer.
Absolutely, because there are still no knowns around that incident. You still know that someone is not on the bed, they're on the floor. So whilst you don't at all understand how that happened, there are going to be actions to go forward with, and there's going to need to be collaboration on what's the best way forward. That might require hospitalisation. Is hospitalisation what you're after? Those sorts of things. So whilst you may not know exactly how it happened, there are facts in front of you that are there, that something happened, and you can see a picture enough to provide a level of open disclosure.
Yeah. Oh, that's leaning in a really constructive way. Somebody else has asked what your tips are for young players. In other words, people who haven't started this journey yet but are persuaded by what you and Bill and Louise have shared with us this afternoon and want to know where to start. What would your guidance be?
Oh, absolutely. Seek support. There is, as Louise has alluded to, there is a large amount of information around what is expected, and then build that into how you're build on your culture, number one, but what are your processes going to be? How are you going to provide support and provide information to your staff group? And yep, it's a scary time to commence, but no time like the present. Use all the supports that are around you, and we've got a really, I think we've got a sector that likes to help each other. So reach out. We've got lots of different forums in which you can ask questions, seek support from others. What went wrong for you? I don't want to repeat that, those sorts of things. So I think it's really important just to not feel isolated, to reach out and give someone a call or drop them a line or whatever it might be.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a nice segue to bring Louise back in. Louise, we have actually done a fair bit of work on this within the Commission, and we've published on it as well. Do you just want to outline what information is available from our website and what further we're intending to do?
Yeah, thanks, Janet. Look, we've got, and Donna gave me a slight plug there. We do have open disclosure resources available on the Commission's website, including an open disclosure framework and guidance, a poster, information videos, that type of thing. We're also going to have, as I mentioned before, our complaints officers checking in with providers to encourage and support the use of open disclosure during the complaints handling process. And through the regulatory campaign, we're going to look to have an ongoing conversation with providers and workers about the type and level of support they need from the Commission to incorporate open disclosure into their model of care. I wonder though, Bill, I might bring you in at this point if there's anything you wanted to add on top of what Donna had mentioned about getting started.
Look, Louise, thank you. And Janet, wanted to add in probably from a CEO's perspective and a board member who has obligations to go out to the centres. I think to those people that are starting, I would say challenge the executives and the board members when they're there, have those open disclosure with them, because a lot of the time, you know, if they're being shut down or they've had a bad experience, the CEOs and the executives can work through that with the leadership team, because again, we want that open disclosure. And sometimes I know people that are running the centres or on shift and that very busy, lots to do, and they might appear that they've been shut down. So again, if we don't, as board members and senior execs and leaders, get that feedback as well, it's a bit hard for us to act on that culture. So our role is really much to drive that culture. So I would say, you know, to the people that are new, practice open disclosure, go up one manager or two managers as you need to. Board members should be out and about in the centres, you know, collar one of those in the lunchroom and let us know. And again, if, you know, most of us senior execs will know that, you know, we have to address the culture rather than the individual. So, you know, without open disclosure, the whole resident experience, you know, it just doesn't happen as to where we want it to be and provide that quality care.
Okay, that's a useful addition. Louise, probably final question to you. There has been some thematic continuity in some of the questions in relation to how the Commission intends to regulate this particular practice. And it's something that we've been giving a bit of thought to. Do you want to summarise our approach as we go on site, as we review performance?
Yeah, sure. Look, under the current quality standards, we're going to continue to assess performance of services through our assessment contacts and our audits, like the site audits, the review audits, quality audits, where the evidence that we gather through those processes are going to help to determine whether the service is compliant with their open disclosure obligations as required by Standard 8 and Standard 6. And with the strength and quality standards that come into effect under the new Act, our quality assessors will also make assessments under the new standards. So, you know, we are going to be out there looking for evidence that open disclosure is being used and practiced.
And what about the outcomes of open disclosure? How do we look for a body of evidence or information to tell us that it's not only being used, but used to effect?
Yeah, so we want to see open disclosure being practiced consistently at the different levels, so at the service provider and sector level. And we're going to use all the data and information that we hold as a commission and that we also gather to get that holistic understanding of how open disclosure is being used across the different levels. And we'll draw on things like performance reports, serious incident response scheme notifications, and the complaints data. We might also look at other sources of information that show how open disclosure is embedded within a provider's quality system, and also look at their feedback and complaints management processes.
Well, I think probably that brings us roughly to the end of our time. It's been quite an excursion, and I think we've covered a lot of ground. And judging by some of the information, the the questions and comments which have come through. I think many of those watching have really appreciated the attention to detail. Let me close by making a few final remarks. Our aim today at this point of the webinar is that you walk away from the session with a clear message, and each of our speakers has phrased this in a particular way, but essentially what it is that when things go wrong, we expect you to practice open disclosure because it's the right thing to do, not only for the people receiving care, but also their loved ones and their representatives, and also for yourselves, your aged care workers and your services. So everyone benefits from the use of this particular practice. If you're not doing it now, then it's time to get started. And I hope this webinar has proven to you that it's available to you as a practice and it's a necessary practice for you to pursue. Check out our website for resources on open disclosure. As Donna has encouraged, reach out to other providers and find out what they're doing. Learn from your peers. My very special thanks to Bill, Donna and Louise for sharing their information, their insights with us this afternoon. Please stay online to complete the feedback form. We are very keen to hear from you as to how you found this webinar and what more you might want to hear about from us. And with that, I wish you farewell. Thank you very much for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.